Hello and welcome to In a Spiritual Sense, where we discuss all things spiritual, from growing your intuition, speaking with spirit guides, diving into past lives, the paranormal, and more. Join me, Stacey Piagno, where we work to bridge the gap between science and spirit. Hello and welcome back to another episode of In a Spiritual Sense. I am your host, Stacey Piagno, and we are now well into October. Fall has begun, and I hope you all had a wonderful week. Now, I do have a quick announcement for you guys because I've been having so many of you reach out with so many beautiful stories of how Spirit has reached out to you. And so I was thinking I would love to start off each episode by hearing more of your personal stories and stories of how you have connected with Spirit. So if you have any messages or synchronicities to share, please comment down below. Or for those of you listening, send an email to info, that's I-N-F-O, at inaspiritualsense.com, because I think it would be really neat to start sharing some of your stories to start off each episode. Or if you have any questions or any topics that you want me to cover, again, go ahead and comment or send an email, and we can make that part of the show. So let's make that happen. Now, with that said, today we are going to get scientific with our minds as we learn to rewire our brains for our benefit. And I'm going to first start by quoting something from one of my favorite books. And I'm curious if you can relate to this. We get frustrated when we can't have what we want, and disappointed when what we like ends. We suffer that we suffer. We get upset about being in pain, angry about dying, sad about waking up sad yet another day. This kind of suffering, which encompasses most of our happiness and dissatisfaction, is constructed by the brain. It is made up, which is ironic, poignant, and supremely hopeful. For if the brain is the cause of suffering, it can also be its cure. So today we'll spend some time in the mind. And what I love about today's episode is, yes, we can talk about the spiritual energy of our hearts and our environments all we want, but we are in physical bodies, and there is a physical element to our health as well. So spending time in the mind and learning about how our brains can either support us or lead to our suffering is another piece of the puzzle we have to be aware of. So the book I just quoted was one of my favorite books that not only inspired this episode, but really inspired me to take control of my own thoughts. And it's titled The Practical Neuroscience of Buddha's Brain. And it's such a good book. And it has nothing to do with religion. So if that is something that would steer you away, don't let it. But pretty much what we're going to get into today is understanding that the way our brain has been wired has helped us survive. But we must be aware of how humanity has evolved, because what suited us millions of years ago is not going to still suit us today. And if you do not consciously work on your mind, you might see that you are living a life that does not support your happiness due to the way that your brain is still wired from past conditionings. Now, with all of that said, I will start by saying I am not a doctor, I am not a scientist, and I probably know the bare minimum about how our brain works. But what I do know makes sense to me and has helped me tremendously. So, as usual, what I can offer you is what I have learned. So, let's get into the history of how our minds became shaped. Starting back millions of years ago, as cavemen and cavewomen roamed, life was about surviving. Similar to the first episode where we discussed our 5 senses supporting our survival. Well, in addition to that, our brain has naturally been wired to think negative. And there was a purpose to this. And the purpose is that thinking negative kept us alive. Because the second we let our guard down, there was something out there that could kill us. An animal, a cliff, poisonous food, an invasion, natural disasters, the list goes on and on. So thinking negative was good. It was safe. It allowed us life. And those who lived were the ones who focused on negative experiences. And so focusing on the negative is something that was passed down through their genes. And so for millions of years, those genes that focus on negative have now been transferred to us. But guess what? We're not living in the past anymore. And we don't have to worry about getting chased by a tiger when we go out to get groceries. And so now the issue is that over time, our brains are so used to firing negative neurons, sending signals to our body to look out, don't believe, don't trust, be careful, whatever it may be. We are stuck with thoughts that in most cases do not serve us, thoughts that can lead to our suffering. You see, we have to be aware of how our brain works and how our body works because we're the ones living in it. And if we're aware of what's going on under the surface, we can then start to have more control over what it is we're navigating in. I want you to think about if you hopped into the pilot seat of an airplane and you knew nothing about airplanes and you took off with this thing we call life. Well, what do you think is going to happen? You're probably going to spiral out of control and it's not going to go in your favor. Well, who's to say our bodies are any different? See, we got to get up in our thoughts and get up in our wires and start connecting with what's going on if we want to have any kind of say in our life. So a brief description of what I do know about the way our brain works is that we have billions of neurons, and these neurons can signal other neurons through something called synapses. And each neural signal that passes through this synapses is a bit of information. In addition, these neurons can also make lasting circuits that strengthen their connections to one another as a result of mental activity. So, in layman's terms, the more you think about something, the more it will spread, and the stronger that synapse or pathway becomes. And the more ingrained our pathways are, the harder it is to change them. So what happens is we have this default network that the book says our bodies go into as a baseline resting state. And when we're awake and we're not doing anything, this default network, quote, seems to be tracing your environment and body for possible threats. And this baseline awareness is often accompanied by a background feeling of anxiety that keeps you vigilant. So when this kicks in, doing any small task, such as walking through a store, can be very difficult because your body is subconsciously feeling caution, unease, and tension, unquote. I can actually remember when I was younger, like elementary school age, sitting in the car and looking out the window and feeling really happy. And then all of a sudden, feeling this sense of depression come in and thinking, why do I feel like this right now when I was just happy 5 seconds ago? And this happened all the time. And I wouldn't say that I was ever depressed as a whole, but I can consciously remember the transition of my thoughts shifting from positive to negative. And I think some of that is natural to our systems, like that default network I was just talking about. But as we're about to get into, the longer you stay in those negative thoughts, the more negative neurons are firing, thus cementing those pathways and creating more negative feelings. It's like a vicious cycle. So we have to stop by catching our thoughts and bringing awareness to them in the moment. And it's difficult because negative thoughts hold a greater impact than positive thoughts. Remember from history, those who survived and passed on their genes were the ones who put an importance on negative experiences. So we have to fight against our own nature to retrain our brain and retrain how we want our neurons to fire. And it takes time. They say it takes 5 positive interactions to overcome the effect of 1 negative interaction. So let's play that out. Think about when you wake up in the morning and within the first few minutes you think or say, oh, I don't want to get up today. I don't want to go to work. I'm tired. Well, that was just 3 negative thoughts. So now it would take you 15 positive thoughts to get you back to neutral. So you continue on. Ugh, I don't like my job. I hate being single. I'm mad at my partner. I don't like the way I look. I'm late. I'm stupid. I have nothing to eat. Well, honey, you now have 100 positive thoughts to get you back to neutral. So you can clearly see the point being made. Now, because we are sometimes stuck in our anxiety or stuck in our suffering, what happens is we replay these memories called mini movies. And because of the way our default network works, most commonly the mini movies we play in our heads are memories that cause us suffering. See, our neurons are so used to firing negative responses, it only makes sense that the thoughts that pop into our heads are ones that make us angry or sad or disappointed. Think about it. How many times have you been driving in the car or thinking in the shower and you catch yourself thinking of a story from the past that caused you suffering? Or maybe you're thinking about the future and how things won't work out, or how they're going to be challenging, or how you're going to have to defend yourself. And you get caught in those thoughts. That's a mini movie. There's a quote by Lao Tzu, a Chinese philosopher, and he says, if you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the present. And I think it's so important that we become aware of what we're thinking as our minds drift. This is probably the turning point in my mental success and the most important thing I've learned about my mind. There have been so many times when my mind has drifted off thinking about something that has no benefit to me. And when this happens, I have to recenter and say, okay, I caught it. That wasn't real, or it's not happening now, or that was in the past and it has no effect on me in this moment. And that's when I say, when I catch myself in a mini movie. And seriously, if you start paying attention to this, you might catch yourself in mini movies all day long. But through the awareness of this, you can redirect your thoughts. If you don't like the channel that you're on, then change it. But the problem is, you can't change the channel if you're not aware you're on it. I recently channeled something about anxiety, and I really wanted to share it because when I was younger, I had a lot of anxiety, pretty much around high school and college years, and I just didn't know how to cope. And I would get so stressed about the smallest things when in the big picture, none of it even mattered. So I get what it's like to have anxiety. And I feel like anxiety is such a common feeling in so many people. So what I want to share is anxiety is the feeling of pressure when there is no pressure at all, because pressure is created through the mind. Whether it comes from you or another, anxiety is the thought of pressure. Anxiety is created from various seeds, but they only grow if watered. How often do you water your seeds of anxiety? As you become aware of this, perhaps your anxious feelings can diminish. Anxiety is unwanted energy within us, so if you see it, pluck it. But try to find the root where it may return. Are you anxious from a lack of control, a need to do, a need to be stimulated, a need to rest? Are you living in the future, living in the past? Is there a way you can freeze in your anxious feelings? Just freeze and observe. If you can learn to sit in that moment, you have gained power. So a little trick that I like to do when I catch myself in these feelings or mini movies is to imagine a wand pulling up my thoughts. You know that scene from Harry Potter where they extract memories and whoever it was, maybe Dumbledore, puts a wand up to his head and he pulls out his memory. And it looks like a little strand of light being plucked from the side of his head. That is what I do to extract mini movies from my brain. And I'll catch myself thinking about it, and then I'll imagine a wand pulling the energy of that thought away, and I'll throw it in the air to disappear. And that is literally the technique I do to remove unwanted thoughts. Because if we can catch friction or negativity within us, we can then learn how to release that energy. And with that said, I'm going to get energetic for a second. I've been thinking a lot about this lately. If energy cannot be created or destroyed, then we do need to be careful of what kind of energy we are releasing back into the world. And maybe this isn't as peculiar to mini movies, but It reminds me about how society teaches us to breathe in the positive and exhale the negative. Well, energy is real. And if we are releasing negative energy, it has to go somewhere. So if you don't want that energy to go back into your space or to go back into society, perhaps the better idea is to release any energy that is not serving you as love. I have gotten into the daily habit of asking my angels, guides, those from the light, whoever you want to pray to help me release any energy that is not serving me and release it as love into the atmosphere. And it takes 1 minute minimum, more if you want. But just close your eyes, breathe, and ask. Then take a big exhale and imagine all of your worries and anxiety and stress floating off of you as little hearts that go and pop away as bubbles. And so, yeah, between the evaporating hearts and magical wands, I stay cleansed. And in addition to that, another thing that I sometimes will visualize is a shield that deflects any kind of frictional energy. For example, let's say I'm driving in a car and someone behind me gets mad and speeds up, cuts me off, and yells at me. Well, I just visualize a shield deflecting that energy away from my space. Or maybe if someone's response makes you feel some kind of way, before you react, just put up your shield and imagine the vibration of what they said being bounced off before you have a chance to absorb it and internalize it. And look, I know creating these analogies are silly, but what happens is, if you can do this, that now means you're aware of the situation. And you are now actively aware of the energy around you. And so, in addition, once the brain can visualize something, it becomes a thought. And once something is a thought, the creation process has begun and things start to manifest. So when visualizing this, you are physically releasing or preventing any unwanted energy from your aura. I find people don't put enough value on thoughts. It has literally been proven that thoughts are created of matter. There is substance to our thoughts, and everything around us is energy. And I feel people often dismiss this idea either because they cannot see it, or maybe they think it doesn't have any effect on their lives. But because our emotions, feelings, and thoughts are all created of matter, this means they can be exchanged and transferred. And one way is through proximity. So if this is understood, we can now have a better chance of being in control of our emotions, feelings, and thoughts. Now, try to follow me on this. On the flip side, however, if we stop thinking about something, it ceases to exist. I really want you to internalize this. If there is not one single thought of something, it doesn't exist. Think about it. So, can we now practice this with our, quote, problems? Yes, sometimes we have to take care of our shit. But if you stop thinking about it like that, it won't exist. And I mean that on the deepest level. If there is no creation of something, there is no thought of it. And if there is no thought of something, there is no creation of it. But with that said, bypassing is something I want to touch on. And for those of you who are not familiar with bypassing, it is when we have an issue and it affects us and we move on without dealing with it. And in return, it festers and causes more suffering in the future. Just because our active mind isn't thinking about something doesn't mean it's not still attached to our subconscious. So we don't want to bypass. We need to acknowledge our feelings and acknowledge what we feel are problems. But here's the trick. Changing your perspective so that they are no longer problems, but opportunities. I know I've spoken on that before, but it's always good to say. Our perspectives hold the key to transforming our lives. And once you can make peace with the opportunities you have, you can stop seeing them as problems. And once you stop seeing anything as a problem, you have seized that thought, thus stopping its creation. The practical neuroscience of Buddha's brain talks about how Every time we latch on to positive thoughts or feelings, our brain builds a little bit of neural structure. And over time, accumulating the impact of this positive material will literally, synapse by synapse, change your brain. And our brains will continue learning and changing up until our very last breath. So don't ever feel like it's too late or like you're too far stuck in something. You always have the power to change. Every second is an opportunity for a new thought that will shape your future. So be aware of your thoughts now and savor those that benefit you. So, with that said, I do have another quick passage I channeled that deals with this topic, and I named it The Depth of Our Shadows. And it's about how we can get to the root of our issues without excusing them or covering them up. If you find yourself stuck, it is rare you will find your answer on the exterior. For within you is a crack that must be acknowledged. It is a crack that can only be found by you, for it is only you that understands its true depths. And to look for an answer on the exterior is to pave over this crack. But in doing so, the crack gets larger, and thus the foundation in which you build upon continues to fall. For a cracked foundation is no place to build. So we must sit with ourselves and go within to become acquainted with our cracks. And it is not always a friendly place, for the deeper the crack, the darker it is. It is in these times where bravery and courage must be found. To become friendly with the darkness within us is no easy task, for those who are timid will not see the depths of those who have courage. You will not always like what you find, but to find it is a step in filling the crack, a step that must be made to build. And the medicine for filling your cracks is to love that in which created them, because it is love that creates the glue for our cracks to be sealed. And once we dive in and acknowledge what needs to be loved, only then will we have a foundation strong enough to build on. So, I hope you can think about that if it is something that resonates with you. And with the background of now knowing why we think the way we think, and knowing how our minds became shaped, and how we can get stuck in many movies, knowing how to release energy that doesn't serve us and deflect it from coming into our space. And after learning how to get in touch with our cracks and not excuse them, I now want to touch on what happens when life throws arrows at you, and it is only natural for us to react. There's a story that's been told over and over, and it probably has different versions, but it's the story of how Buddha turned the evil Mara's arrows into flowers. And it goes, on the night that the Buddha attained enlightenment, he sat under a tree. While he was sitting there, the forces of the Mara shot arrows at him to distract him from becoming enlightened. He merely turned their arrows into flowers. And in this story, the Mara is personified as an evil army, but in reality, it could represent anything that causes friction. So our jealousy, our anger, our greed, our desire, etc. And to break this down in a scientific way, a great analogy from the book I quoted earlier talks about getting hit with darts, and that the idea that we will always have pain is inevitable, and the fact that we react to pain is good. It's natural. We learn from it. So the stove is hot, it causes pain, don't touch it. This can be seen as the first dart. First darts expressed by Buddha are, quote, inescapable physical or mental discomfort from existing. As long as you live and love, some of those darts will come your way, unquote. But we have to be conscious of not allowing second darts, known as our reactions, to take over, because once we allow ourselves to react to the pain or react to the suffering, we are now causing more suffering. Thus the effect of the second dart. For example, you stub your toe and it hurts. That's the initial pain. You can't do anything about it but let it pass. But then you turn around and you yell at your kids because your foot hurts and it was their toy that was in your way. And then you're angry, and then you think about getting angry, and then that makes you more angry. And so now you are allowing that second and third dart to hit you. And from there, it snowballs into more darts. And, quote, second darts often trigger more second darts through associative neural networks. So you might feel guilt about your anger of the kids getting in your way, or sadness that you feel hurt yet again by someone you love. And when in relationships, second darts can create vicious cycles between you and another. So your second dart reactions can then trigger reactions from the other person, which then sets off more second darts from you, and so forth. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. That's a quote by Haruki Murakami. So I'm going to slide that in there. So as a result from the second dart, we know suffering in the mind causes stress. But now let's bring the physical body into it. See, the problem with suffering is that it affects our nervous and endocrine systems. So let's use the example of traffic again. I'm driving and the person next to me gets mad, cuts me off, and yells. If I am not aware of my reactions, the social and emotional conditions I am reacting to can cause just as much pain as a physical condition. The brain doesn't know any difference. And this can be as simple as one worrisome thought. So, in other words, that thought you had, quote, draws on many of the same neural networks as physical pain. That's why getting rejected can feel as bad as getting a root canal, unquote. So, when we worry or when we react, we get an alarm sent to our brain, which then sends signals to our major organs and our major muscle groups. Then we enter fight or flight mode, and our pituitary gland signals to our adrenal glands to release stress hormones. And as stated earlier, we don't need to go through life living in fight or flight mode. That doesn't serve us anymore. We don't have to live like we did thousands of years ago. And now, I do understand that there are always exceptions to this. Depending on your living situation, yes, there will be a percentage of people who are still surviving and who do need to live in fight or flight mode. But as a majority, we should not be living in the constant energy of our reactions. We don't have to live like that, because if you're living in this energy, it will continue to build around you and within you, and it will consume you. And I think the power of understanding this can at least be a start to holding ourselves accountable when reacting, and to at least acknowledge the harm that we are causing to our bodies when we choose to respond with anger or hatred or worry. Again, these feelings are inevitable, but to allow the second dart of anger or hatred or worry to hit is only to continue harming yourself. And if you find that you're in a position where the advice I give you doesn't help, then try a different modality. My goal in this is just to offer you another point of view that has worked for me. And something that just popped into my head that I want to put into perspective for everyone is, if you ask for something, in order for you to have that thing, you must be placed in a situation that will allow you to have what it is you're asking for. For example, if you want to learn patience, then you have to be placed in a situation that would allow you to show patience. Am I going to show patience when everything is going in my favor? No, because that's not what patience is. Patience is when things are not going in your favor and you can remain centered. So if you pray for patience, what you're really doing is praying for chaotic situations so that you can show your patience. See how that works? If I ask for XYZ, I should be ready to receive the opposite so I can learn how to produce XYZ. If I pray for love, be ready to be placed in unloving situations so I can learn what love is. Is love only loving those who are easy to love? No, that isn't love. See what I'm doing? Love is when you can love those who are lovable and unlovable. That's true love anyways. And so I feel like I've touched on this before, but we pray for things and wish for things all the time. And when the opportunity comes for us to earn these things that we just asked for, we back away and we complain and we don't make the choices to earn what it is we want. So again, we're stuck without it. And then we pray for it and wish for it again. And when the situation presents itself, we shy away from it. And it's this vicious cycle of unawareness. So I pray that today's episode can bring you mindfulness. And again, if you want to create mindfulness, be ready to receive the opposite so that you can learn how to produce mindfulness. So with this, now it is time to digest and put it into play. Time to go practice. And remember, treat life like it's a game. Welcome the challenges. And when friction arises, because it will, treat it as an opportunity so that you can work towards having less friction for your future. And with that, if you enjoyed this week's episode, I hope you use it to inspire those around you. And I will see you next time on In a Spiritual Sense. For those looking to connect further, please feel free to send emails to info@inaspiritualsense.com or hit me up on Instagram at spiagno, that is SPIAGNO, where you can find weekly inspiration and updates. I look forward to connecting with you.